Jim worked in Canberra for a year as a speechwriter for Kevin Rudd. He writes about politics and life in this clean, clear, detailed, funny, truthful style. The way Jim writes is the same way he thinks and feels. It's a voice of inclusion, directness, and universality. He writes how we wish all our politicians would speak. If Kevin had used more of Jim's speeches, who knows, he might still be PM.
Thank you for having me here tonight, and thanks, Rob, for those lovely words. Before I start, I just want to say that I think this is my 5th time at a Rotunda event. Bruno put were you 5 or more? I just want to say that Rotunda is, I first spoke at a Rotunda event in a former lunatic asylum in Sunbury, and then we spoke opposite a cinema, and I did something opposite a cinema in Yarraville, and then above Flemington Racecourse a couple of times, and then in Seddon. It's been a tour of the western and northern suburbs doing Rotunda events, and what Bruno does is really remarkable. And I was just thinking about that when Michelle talked about words, feeling very sorry that we might be losing words as a written word, as a way of communicating, a written word on paper. And Bruno, through Rotunda, does so much to keep it going. So thank you for having me here, Bruno. I'm going to read some things and perhaps read a couple of short extracts from my book, which is called Speechless, A Year in My Father's Business. My enduring love affair with writing, if those are the right words to describe my feelings for such a painful business, began as an enduring love affair with reading. I can't remember a time when I wasn't reading. Just today I had lunch with an old primary school friend whom I hadn't seen in 25 or more years. As we talked about where our lives had gone, he's now a software engineer in Silicon Valley, he reminded me of how much as a boy I used to read. His mum used to tell people years ago, Jamie came to stay last night, and guess what? He brought a book. Reading was how I discovered the world and how I escaped it. Reading was Look and Learn magazine, and it was Lord of the Rings. Reading was War, Alistair MacLean novels, Roger, we have to talk later, and the Dam Busters. And reading a few years later was love. At the age of 16, I was working on a dairy farm near Shepparton when I read in my bungalow, heart beating and tears pricking my eyes, Darcy's words to Elizabeth. You are too generous to trifle with. If your feelings are still what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever. When Elizabeth replies, Austin does an extraordinary thing. Elizabeth now forced herself to speak, and immediately, though not very fluently, gave him to understand that her sentiments had undergone so material a change since the period to which he alluded, as to make her receive with gratitude and pleasure his present assurances. The happiness which this reply produced was such as he had probably never felt before, and he expressed himself on the occasion as sensibly and as warmly as a man violently in love can be supposed to do. Why is Elizabeth's reply and Darcy's response to it so powerful? Because it is all in indirect speech. At the vital moment, the moment we've been waiting for from near the start of the novel, Austin pulls back. Less is more. Only one word gloriously punctures the drawing room formality of the scene. Darcy is a man violently in love. Of course, I understood none of that. I only felt it when I was a 16-year-old boy in Shepparton. Many years later, a woman explained it to me over a drink, the first we had together. 17 years later, she and I got married. Now I'm 51, and I read every day, every spare moment. Perhaps the most reliably happy moment of any day is when I sit down in a cafe, order a coffee, and start reading the newspaper, magazine, or book I've brought with me. Words are not the thing itself, they only describe it. And this is their magic. You, the reader, have to imagine the scenes they paint. You have to do the work. When you do, those marks on paper can bring you the world. So being a reader, I guess I naturally wanted to be a writer. I wanted to do the thing that gave me such pleasure. I wanted to be a great novelist. But I discovered writing was difficult. Over time, I've learned to modify my expectations. When I was 18, I thought I'd write Ulysses. Now I'm not sure I'll ever get to read Ulysses. You see, I struggled to write. I wanted to do it too much. At 33, I tried to write a novel about a young man who returns to Melbourne after living in New York, who is arrogant and lost, who begins a relationship with a woman who is a cook in an inner-city pub. I wrote some good scenes, but the main character, the heart of the novel, was invisible on the page, because the main character, in essence, was me. After university, I became a journalist. It seemed like a good way of being a writer and getting paid for it. And I'll just read to you a scene from my book, which describes my first encounters with journalism. And actually something that happened just before that. In 1981, when I was 20, my brother Nick and I were visiting Dad in Canberra. Paul Keating sat down with us as we had dinner in the parliamentary dining room. "What do you want to do, Jamie?" he asked. "I think journalism," I said. "Yeah," he said, "I thought about journalism too, but I decided I wanted to make history, not write about it." He grinned like a riverboat gambler that just wiped the table and headed off for a date with Destiny, his showgirl. In 1986, I took the road Keating didn't take. I got a cadetship at the age. On my first job, I was sent to Broadmeadows to interview a 14-year-old snooker prodigy. On my second, I interviewed Dame Edna Everidge. On the third, I sat down with The Damned, a British punk band I'd known for years, but who I imagined inhabited an inaccessible universe. I was astounded by the roaming freedom of journalism. How you came to work not knowing what would happen that day. How being sent into the city armed only with a notebook and the words, "I'm from the age," was enough to persuade people to tell their stories, let you see into their lives. I could see a lifetime of learning here, and at the end of the week, they gave me a paycheck. But even as a journalist, I was pretty tortured. I spent too long crafting my first paragraph, only to later throw it out on many occasions. For long features, I interviewed too many people, then struggled to shoehorn them all into the piece. I took too long, fussed too much over words. I was always late. An editor called me PD James, past deadline James. Then, while European correspondent for The Age, about 7 years ago, under the pressure of 2 or 3 deadlines a day, I finally learned something about writing that I'll never forget. Bash it out. No matter how horrible it seems, vomit it out. Get it down on paper. Then read it, then write it again. Then maybe write it again. Out of the mists of doubt, a shape begins to emerge. However time-consuming this seems, it takes far less time and produces far less pain than staring at a blank screen. About 8 months after getting back from London, out of the blue, I was offered a job writing speeches for Kevin Rudd. The experience with him did not go well, but I had a fascinating time, and I learned a little about the magic of the speech. I also learned that good writing takes many forms, and that making the dullest government document clearer and more compelling is not worth to sneer at, because someone out there will be reading it. After nearly a year and a half of flying each week to Canberra, I came home, and some months later decided to tell a story about my experiences. I wanted to be a writer from about the age of 11. After a brief apprenticeship of some 40 years, I finally got out a book. In this book, I wanted to write about speechwriting and about working in public service. But as soon as I began to write, I realised that I couldn't write about politics without exploring my past, the role in my life of my father, John Button, who, as Robert said, had been a minister in the Hawke and Keating governments. Writing about him led me to all kinds of places I had not planned to go. The hardest being the death to a drug overdose of my brother David, and the effect that had on my father's career in life. Writing about all these things was an astonishing experience. As I wrote, literally as I typed the words on the page, I was learning about my father and about me. What he and I had said together, what we had not said, and what we should have said. The ways in which, though we were good friends, Together we were speechless. This opportunity to understand, I realised, was why I wanted all my life to be a writer. I'll just read a short extract about that. This is about my brother David and my father. My brother Nick believes that in his last years, Dad came to terms with Dave's death. Certainly he raised it less. But after he died, his partner Joan told me that once or twice a year he would drink too much and talk about Dave. Always he would cry, then zip it up and move on. So it never left him then. How he carried it through his life, and especially a life in politics, I do not know. We are all icebergs, 4/5 of us beneath the surface. The Irish writer Colm Toibin once wrote of how much sorrow can be held within, and how nothing seems to have any shape or meaning until it is well past and lost, and how much, under the weight of pure determination, can be forgotten and left aside, only to return in a night of piercing pain. Perhaps it was like that for Dad. Nothing understood until much later, yet nothing lost. I see now that Dad was always with us. We were a tentative, sometimes timid, tender family. Our rare fights frightened us and had to be quickly mended for fear of where they would lead. We never quite shook off the thought that life could go catastrophically wrong. In my father's smile, which people liked so much, perhaps because it seemed to hide so much, including mischief and sorrow, there was always something of his lost son. My book, Speechless, is about many things, but I think this story, My Father and Me, is what it is most about. So if you read it, I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.